Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we are going to study about one of the important security related service, which is IAM, that stands for Identity and Access Management in AWS, right? Let's get started. The first thing which comes into our mind when we try to keep our data in cloud, or we are willing to deploy our application on cloud, or started to working our startup in cloud, right? So the main thing which comes in our mind is regarding cloud security. So cloud security is the highest priority in AWS. When we try to host our environment in cloud, we can be assured that it is hosted in a data center or in a network architecture that's built to meet the requirement of the most security sensitive organization. Additionally, this high level security is available on a pay as you go basis, meaning there is really no upfront cost and the cost for using the service is a lot cheaper compared to the on premises environment. So AWS makes all the efforts to ensure its end user that their data and their application is secure. Now there are many types of security services that are available, but some of them are very popular and actually used every single time when you deploy or build anything on your AWS cloud, right? So the first one is IAM, which we are going to study in this particular video. Another is key management system, KMS, Cognito, and web access firewall. All these things we will be discussing in the upcoming lectures, of course, but here we will be concentrating ourselves to IAM. Now, what is identity and access management? AWS Identity and Access Management is a web service that helps you securely control access to AWS resources. Now, here you need to understand that there are two important terms whenever we deal with security in any computer application. The first word is authentication, and the second one is authorization, right? So we can use IAM to control who is the authenticated user and which application is authenticated to perform any action or operation on AWS resources. The next term is authorization. Authorization is permission to use any resource, right? Suppose I am an authentic person in an organization. I am working in an organization and I have my authenticity. But whether I am applicable to perform that action or not, right? So suppose you have a company and you have a user who is only, responsible for the production task, right? So he will not be involved in the auditing team, right? So that particular person is not authorized to work upon the audit reports. So that is authorization. He is only authorized to work on the production department, right? So this authenticity, meaning are you the correct person to enter into the account, and authorization, even if you are the correct person for that organization, are you authorized to perform that particular action or not? That is controlled by IAM, which makes it a very, very significant service as far as security is concerned, right? So whenever we create our AWS account, we create a root account, right? So when we create a free tier account, by default that account is a root account, and one of the thing is that we should not share, right, any credentials of our root account with anybody, right? Next thing, in IAM we have certain components, right? So IAM allows us to create users, groups, which is a collection of users, roles, and policies. Policies over here are the permissions, right? We are going to see in the next video about it, right? With IAM, you can centrally manage the users, security credentials such as access keys and permissions that controls which resource a user can access, right? So everything is centrally managed by IAM, right? So it has a lot of thing in it, but we shall be understanding it slowly and gradually so that the whole concept of IAM should be clear to us, right? Now, The next important thing is how actually IAM works, right? Now, this thing is very important because if the working of IAM is clear to you, then the complete concept of user group roles policies will be easier to understand, right? So it is a service which is used for authorization and authentication. That should be clear in your mind. So first of all, what we have with us is our AWS account, right? And right, this is nothing but your free tier account, okay? So you have your account. Now, in order to open up your account or access your account, there are three methods, right? This is very important. How we can access AWS services, right? We access AWS services through AWS account. We have seen the free tier account, right? And in order to get into or log in into our free tier account, there are three main methods. The first one is console, right? Which is nothing but a web-based interface, right? A GUI interface, which is given by AWS, which we have seen in our previous videos. The second thing is CLI. CLI stands for command line interface, right? This command line interface is a command prompt like structure. We can install it on our system. It is available for both operating systems like Windows and Linux and all, right? So we can access the AWS resources or services through commands also, right? Again, the detail we will be studying in the upcoming lectures. Then we can have application program interface, that is APIs we can have, right? Where we can authenticate ourselves to use those services with the help of the code, right? Now, if you want to understand about CLI and APIs, I can mention the description of those videos also in the link. I have explained how to access AWS services through Python, right? Boto 3. I will be mentioning the link in the description for that also. So these are the three ways with which we can actually get into our AWS account. So when we authenticate to AWS, we do so via IAM, right? So in order to authenticate, what we do, we make use of this particular service, which is IAM service, right? And we have certain principles with us, right? What are principles? Principles are users, roles, federated users, and applications, right? Do not get confused. Let me just complete this particular thing, then everything will be clear to you, right? So we have these principles, and these principles must be authenticate to send requests, right? So what we have with us in IAM, we can create a user. What is a user? User is a principal, right? That principal is authenticated, right, to make actions and operations on any service, right? So talking about what is a principal is a person or an application, right, that can make request for an action or operation on AWS resource. For example, a user want to save a file in a bucket, right, in S3 bucket. So that user should be authenticated, right, to make application, to use that particular resource, right? So principals can be of four types: a physical user, right? It can be an employee of your company; a role, right, which is assumed by a service. It can be federated users. You must have encountered it, that sign in with Google, sign in with Facebook, so your credentials are taken from those federated identity providers. And it can be an application. You can program an application, and when you run that application make request to use AWS services. For example, you want to make a, let's say, surveillance system, right, and attendance system accordingly. So when a person comes, the application captures his picture and then compare to the database and mark the attendance. So for comparing the photograph, maybe you want to use AWS recognition. So this application will trigger AWS recognition. So application should be authenticated to request a usage of AWS recognition. So that is the thing over here. So that is done through IAM. Next, now when we attempt to perform any action or operation on AWS resource, a request context is created, right? So whenever we are trying to get into the AWS's account and perform any action, means perform using any resources. Maybe I want to develop a virtual system. Maybe I want to make a CloudWatch alarm. Maybe I want to send a notification to somebody. So different services I shall be using. So whenever we are attempting to perform any action, right, what IAM does, it creates a request context. Now this request context is containing of these few data, right? The first one is the action, what you want to do. Let's say I want to create a virtual server, EC2 instance, right? Resources, definitely I want to make use of EC2 instance, that is my resource, right? Principal, who I am, whether I am a user, whether I am a federated user, whether I am an application program, or whether I am another service assuming any role, right? So principal is who I am, right? My identity. Then the environment data, that is related metadata about myself. It can be my IP address, right? From which IP I am actually trying to access my AWS account. And it can be resource related data. So whenever we attempt to log in into any account and do anything, this request context is created. Now, after that, what happens? AWS will authenticate, means IAM will authenticate this request context against policies, right? So what are policies? Policies are basically permissions, right? That this permission is given to this user. This is the authorization, right? So suppose I am a user and I want to create a EC2 instance, right? So what I did, I tried to attempt that action and my request context is created. Now that request context will be compared with these policies, right? In this policies, two types of actions are there, right? The first action is allow and the second one is deny. Suppose in this policy it is written that access to EC2 instance is denied, right? That means the user, right? That means this request context will become invalid. The user cannot access or that service or perform any action on that. Suppose in these particular policies which are attached to the user, it is written that allow access to EC2 instance, right? That means this request context become valid and I can perform any action on this, in EC2 instances. So this is policies. Okay, AWS determine whether to authorize this particular request context or not. So only two actions are there, either it is denied or it is allowed, right? Now, if your request is allowed, then you can perform the API actions. That is, if the request is allowed, then you can do anything. You can create an instance, you can create an S3 bucket. Again, S3 bucket should be allowed in the policy. You can create another IAM user and you can do whatever you want to do with that particular service, right? So actions should be authorized on AWS resources, right? So this was a brief yet important description that how actually this identification management service works. So if this particular diagram is clear to you all, then feel free to move to the next slide, which says that what are the components of IAM, right? So the components of IAM are principles and policies, right? So you can create a user, you can create group, which is collection of users, you can create roles which are assumed by some AWS resources only to access other resources, and we have policy statements which are nothing but JSON statements in which we actually allow or deny any action on any resource through a principle, right? So I hope that this particular explanation that how actually this identity and access management service works should be clear to you, right? Now let us move to our console and see how this IAM service looks like. This is your AWS's management console. Here also you can have IAM. This is one of my recently visited services. You can also go to services and scroll down a little in security and identity compliance also. You can have this particular service which is IAM, right? So now clicking on IAM, you will be redirected to IAM management console, right? So this is your IAM management console. And see, this is global, so it is not a regional based service, it is global. This is a new account, so you can see that there are certain recommendations which are given to me, right, for security, for MFA and all these things which I'll be discussing in the upcoming videos also. But what I actually wanted to show you that in IAM, the access management, we can create user groups, users, roles, policies, identity providers, and other account settings, right? So these are the components that we have seen, just now in our slide. So in the upcoming videos, we shall be discussing all these things in detail and their working. And that's it for this video. And I hope that you understand the major concepts. And for more such videos on AWS, stay tuned to my channel. Thank you.